Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Karen Todner, and I'm Gary McKinnon's solicitor. I'd like to introduce the panel to you, first of all. At the end is Shami Chakrabarti, Director of Liberty, David Burrowes, Conservative MP for Enfield and Southgate, and Gary McKinnon's MP. Ben Cooper, who is Junior Counsel for Gary McKinnon. Janice, obviously, Gary's mum. Mark Lieber, who is the Chief Executive of the National Autistic Society, and Edward Fitzgerald, who is leading Team Counsel for Gary McKinnon. I'd like to say that this is a great day for British justice. It has come through in the end. I must pay tribute to the Home Secretary for her courage. She will undoubtedly have come under immense pressure to make a contrary decision. I have always said that Gary should face trial here, if anywhere, but it may be that the Director of Public Prosecutions might consider that Gary has now suffered enough. I have represented Gary for over 10 years. It has been a roller coaster and a hard fight, but worth it in the end. I knew that I was fighting for Gary's life. I would like to pay tribute to Gary's supporters, who have been amazing and have never given up. In particular, the rest of the legal team, all at Kane Todner, Ben Cooper and Edward Fitzgerald QC. We have had support from many sources: the legal profession, the medical profession, journalists, the Daily Mail, celebrities, and of course politicians. In particular, David Burrowes, David Cameron, Nick Clegg, Grant Shapps, Kate Hoey, Keith Vaz and Dominic Rabb have all been very supportive, and I would like to personally thank them. I'd also like to give huge thanks to the general public, who have been so incredibly supportive. I welcome most of the changes described by Theresa May in Parliament today in relation to the Extradition Act. I suspect the devil will be in the detail. The Extradition Act has been a disaster for so many people, and I really hope that change will now come. I'd like to hand over now, please, to Edward Fitzgerald.
Well, I would just like to thank the Secretary of State for her decision. It's not only a very brave decision, but we think it's an entirely legally correct decision. And since she comes in for quite a lot of stick from lawyers sometimes, I think we ought to pay tribute to her decision. She applied the test under the Human Rights Act and under Article 3 of the European Convention. And the case law there says that extradition must be refused on Article 3 grounds if there's convincing and independent evidence of a very high risk of suicide. The medical evidence before her from 5 distinguished psychiatric experts was that there was a very high risk of suicide due to mental disorder. And so she was entitled, and we'd say obliged, to refuse extradition. And just got to say one final thing. It was only thanks to the Human Rights Act that she had the power to stop this extradition. If the Human Rights Act hadn't been there, she would have had to send Gary back, and she wouldn't have had any ground to refuse extradition. So it is important that it's her brave decision, but it's made possible by the existence of the Human Rights Act and by Article 3 of the European Convention.
Ben Cooper?
I've defended Gary McKinnon since his first appearance at Bow Street Magistrates Court in 2005 to explain my role. It has been a long ordeal for Gary, which he can now emerge from, thankfully, thanks to the brave decision of the Home Secretary. But it must be remembered he made full admissions when questioned by British police under caution back in 2002. Had the CPS acted on his admissions and charged him here in 2002, this case would have been over a long time ago. Gary has never sought to evade justice. He was never a fugitive from justice. He simply sought British justice. Many other hackers have been tried here in the UK, even when their targets were abroad and in the US. This case highlights the consistency lacking in CPS charging decisions in these sorts of cases. In the end, the only protection we had to work with as lawyers was the Human Rights Act, and in particular Articles 3 and 8 of the European Convention, British protections which finally won through. Thank you.
Thank you.
As Gary McKinnon's constituency Member of Parliament, I'm very proud and pleased and delighted and relieved by this just and compassionate decision today. For almost 7 years I've been campaigning alongside the wonderful Janice and others to ensure that justice did prevail. And we have to realise that Gary's case is unique and exceptional, a life that needs to be returned to him today. In fact, that is what the decision is a life that's been given back to Gary in a long, dark tunnel of 10 years. At last, he can see some light. It's a decision that is a victory for compassion. It's also a decision that is a victory for promises being delivered and pre-election promises of the Prime Minister, who said that Gary McKinnon is a vulnerable young man, and I see no compassion in sending him thousands of miles away from his home and loved ones to face trial, and the Deputy Prime Minister who said there's no excuse not to do the right thing, and the only right thing is to prevent this vulnerable man being sent over to America. Today, thankfully, compassion and doing the right thing prevailed and promises were delivered. And we need to recognise that this must never happen again, and never happen again to other vulnerable UK citizens being in this torture for so many years. And that is why I look forward to the reforms being proposed today, ensuring that this does never happen again. And finally, in 2009, I accused the previous Home Secretary Alan Johnson of being spineless when he made a decision to ignore medical evidence, and sadly he showed the same lack of spine in Parliament today. But the Home Secretary did show that spine and that compassion and delivered a just verdict on behalf of Gary.
Well, the Director of Liberty doesn't always get to congratulate the Home Secretary, so let's take that opportunity today. It's a great day. It's a great day for compassion and common sense. We now look to the future, which is a future where we will see discretion to consider where alleged activity took place, and where people who are accused of doing things in Great Britain get the opportunity to be tried in Great Britain. But that's not enough. I also want to look forward to a day where nobody gets sent anywhere in the world without a basic case on the evidence being shown in a local court. I want to pay tribute, not just as Director of Liberty, but as a mother and a campaigner, to Janice, who started a campaign, yes, for her own son, but saw that it wasn't just about her own son, it was about everybody's sons and daughters and vulnerable relatives as well. And she managed to unite the lawyers and the media people and the politicians from across the spectrum that you see in this room, and that is a wonderful campaign indeed, and we've had a good day in that campaign today. And finally, just to reiterate, my learned friend Mr. Fitzgerald over there, this will not be reported everywhere tomorrow, this will not be repeated by every newspaper or every politician, but on the Home Office's own letter, this decision was only possible. The only issue that the Secretary of State was permitted to address today to save Gary from unfair extradition was under the much maligned, much misunderstood Human Rights Act of 1998. Thanks very much. Thank you. Mark?
The National Autistic Society campaigning team are delighted that the family's wait is over. And we can only pay tribute to the tireless campaigning of Janice and the stoicism of Gary, really. The NAS's position has always been clear. We've sought to raise the profile of the vulnerability of people with autism in the criminal justice system, and in particular the impact that extradition would have on somebody with Asperger's syndrome and the associated challenges that would bring and the mental health issues that would bring. And we think it's really important that in future people's autism and Asperger's syndrome is taken into account and understood, and expert opinion is sought to better understand the impact of some of these processes on people. 10 years is a long time, and it's the end of a long chapter, and good luck in the next chapter of your life.
Last but not least, Janice.
Sorry. It's been an emotional roller coaster, so not very articulate today. I'm overwhelmed. I'm incredibly happy. I want to say thank you, Theresa May, because it was an incredibly brave decision to stand up to another nation as strong and powerful as America is rare, and she had the guts to do it. And I always felt that she had the strength to come through and do this, and to also change the extradition treaty to bring in forums so that this hopefully won't happen to anyone else is absolutely incredible. And I want to thank Paul Dacre of the Daily Mail, who has stood up for Gary non-stop for years, and Michael Seamark and James Slack. They've been amazing. And the media has been amazing. The support, without the support, we could never, ever have done it. We just couldn't. Gary is here because of all this. And David Burrowes, he's been amazing. He stood up for Gary non-stop, speech after speech in Parliament, never let up for a minute. And Karen, from the very start, every time he used to say, we're at the end, she says, we've been at the end before, we'll carry on. And she would go in and she would keep him here and she would not stop. And Edward Fitzgerald was just fantastic, amazing, and Ben Cooper, absolutely incredible. I mean, thank you to everyone, and to Mark. The National Autistic Society helped us as well, and Shami is astounding. She stands up for everybody and everything in every walk of life, and she's just amazing. She should get the Human Rights Award because she deserves it. There's so many people to thank, and I hope I haven't forgotten right now, because everybody's here. Duncan Campbell as well is amazing. He's and his wife Julie Christie. David Gilmore has been a godsend. He's done so much for us in so many ways. He's paid for psychiatrists. He's helped out in so many ways. Did a song with Chrissy Hind and Bob Geldof. With so much support, and without people power of all these different people together, there's no way Gary would have stayed here. It's us all together. We've done it. We've won for the little person, not just the elite and the privileged, but for the little person. And that is, an incredible achievement. And thank you to everybody here, because you've all done it, every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to throw the floor out for any questions.
How's Gary doing? How did he react to the happy news today?
It's still incredibly emotional. He couldn't speak. He actually literally couldn't speak. And then he cried, and then he hugged, and he cried. It's been hugging and crying, and it's so emotional. And I know it seems odd that I'm tearful now, but it's a culmination of 10 years and 7 months, and it's just so emotional. And it'll take time to go back to having a normal life. Really.
He's got a future to look forward to now.
Absolutely. He said that. He felt like a dead person. He felt he was dead. He had no job. He had no children. He doesn't go on holiday. He doesn't leave the house. He had no conversation. He had nothing. And he felt he was worthless. And I'm hoping that because the extradition treaty is getting changed and forum is getting brought in, that he'll feel that at least that 10 years and 7 months has brought about something that is going to help everyone. So it's not just, it's not been a waste, it's achieved something, and I hope that will give him a little bit of self-respect, because he's got such low self-esteem.
Did you find being here today? What do you think he would have said?
I think he found it difficult to speak, but he's very articulate, but I think at this moment in time, he would just be full and tearful and say thank you, and he would thank all the same people that I have. Everyone, I hope about to have let 1 million people out, because Trudy Styler has been amazing as well. She's come to the court, flown in from New York to stand by our side. Melanie Riley is another incredible person who's fought tooth and nail for this extradition treaty to be changed. She never stops. She's amazing. That's Friends Extradited. But there's so many people, and I'll kick myself because I know I've forgotten 1 million of them.
Janice, do you believe that this has literally been a life-saving decision?
Oh, I know it's been a life-saving decision, because Gary doesn't travel abroad, he doesn't go on holiday, he very rarely leaves North London, and to be taken from everything you know, your family, everything, thousands of miles away, is so terrifying to him. And I can understand that he felt he would rather be dead. But also, everyone thinks it's just Asperger's. It's not. Gary has a grandmother who has schizophrenia, lifelong schizophrenia. His great-grandmother was in a mental institution for 50 years and died there. Gary was taken to a neurologist when he was 16 because he was losing his mental faculties. There's a lot in Gary's mental health history that no one knows about. So the Home Secretary obviously looked at all of that, but there's so much more to it. And the Asperger's syndrome is a very important part of that, very important, because logically, it's not based on emotion, logically his best decision would have been to take his own life than to leave everything he knows. It's an absolute logic.
And he still faces the potential of a prosecution here.
Yes.
Has he said anything about that, how he might cope with that?
We can deal with that because we're here. That's all we've ever asked for. He has his family around him. We can visit him. He has his support. We'll deal with that. That's the only thing we've asked for is for guys to be tried here. And he's actually lost 10 years of his youth. He's lost 10 years of his life. But if this happens as well, we'll deal with it. But at least the actual release of knowing that he's here, it's just incredible. It's such a huge weight off our shoulders. It really is.
Karen, question for you. Keir Starmer has to look at this now. Do you have a message for him that it is in the public interest now for this to be concluded speedily, and what is your message to you?
Well, obviously, he has to do a balancing exercise whether it is in the public interest to pursue Gary now. I understand that he may consider it is, but I would urge him to reconsider that. There is very clear medical evidence that Gary is very depressed and actually is very possibly unfit to plead. So that would be hopefully a factor that you'll take into account. This has been hanging over Gary now since 2002 was his first arrest, and he's actually done more than his sentence in my view, but obviously that's a decision for Keir Starmer. Thank you.
These new foreign law stage, is that going to affect other cases going through your extradition, such as Fitzgerald wirings, for instance?
Well, obviously Theresa May gave a broad outline in Parliament today, but as I said in my speech earlier, I think the devil will be in the detail, and I don't know which cases it's going to affect, when it's going to be implemented, or how it will be considered. I mean, the case of Fitzgerald is also very, very worrying. But until we see exactly what the government is proposing, it's quite difficult to answer anything.
Janice, can I ask you, talking about Gary and his reaction to all this, as a mother, what was it like for you to watch your son go through this for the past 10 odd years?
It's horrendous because basically he would just sit in the dark all the time. He's a really good musician, but he hasn't kept an instrument for years because he couldn't deal with what would bring up. He isn't allowed to go online. He didn't have an outlet. He used to go out and run, and he stopped doing that. So you saw him shut down and slow down. And my fear also was people with Asperger's can become catatonia. And once you're catatonic, it's not very easy to reverse that. And just a waste of talent, 10 years. John Arcila, an advisor to President Obama, came out just last month, or the month before, and said that to prosecute Gary would be ridiculous, that he should be hired here. And really, they have to look at it. Also, the people have this and people with Asperger's, and channel that, because they're such an incredible asset and such amazing people, and they would work so hard. They really would. So it's been awful watching Gary go downhill so badly. But it's such a relief to see him smile for the first time in many years. It's amazing. Any more questions?
The Home Secretary said she may review the way people with Asperger's may be treated when they are detained and charged. Could you say what the problem is and how it should be dealt with?
I didn't realise you said that. That's amazing.
I understand that you said an answer to the question this afternoon.
I think the important point to bear in mind is that Asperger's syndrome is part of the autistic spectrum, and as a spectrum condition, everyone is different, and everybody's Asperger's syndrome affects them in a different way. And it was the view of the experts that Gary's Asperger's syndrome would affect him in a particular way around the extradition, and highlighted the likelihood of suicide. What we've tried to emphasise to the Home Secretary and the Home Office is the importance of expert testimony and expert intervention when anyone with Asperger's syndrome or autism is involved in the criminal justice system. And we really welcome the remarks that the Home Secretary has made, because this is a significant step in the right direction to make sure that people with autism and Asperger's syndrome are supported in the most appropriate way as they move through that system.
Can I ask whether anyone on the panel has any view as to the timing of this decision
given the fact that a man with Asperger's syndrome was extradited 2 weeks ago, Talat Hassan?
You mean, are the decisions inconsistent?
Are the decisions inconsistent, and do you have any concerns about the actual timing itself of the decision?
Well, I think the important distinguishing feature, and we put in obviously representations dealing with the important distinguishing feature, was the very high suicide risk and the 5 experts confirming that. And that clearly is likely to have influenced the Home Secretary to take a different view than that taken in the other cases.
But the great thing about Janice's campaign is that she's always campaigned for justice for everyone. And I really hope, I know that people will have all sorts of concerns about timing, but what I will say to the Home Secretary is that you have said that you will change the law on forum now, and you need to get on and honour that promise. Of course, Janice has run a fantastic campaign, supported by politicians and newspapers across the spectrum, but this cannot end with Gary, as we've just heard. She's promised to change the law on forum, and I think that she needs to do that sooner rather than later, or people will be suspicious that government is just responding to a particular cause for them and not doing justice for everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you for attending.